Hi, everybody. It looks like that participant list is growing. So I'd like to warmly welcome you to this University of Michigan session that we are hosting in partnership with our colleagues at the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX Office, as well as the University Career Center, together with myself, Louise Jackson, at the Alumni Association of the University of Michigan. My name again is Louise Jackson. I'd like to just warmly welcome all of the alumni and students for jumping into the session. Today, we're going to be talking about a very exciting topic: invisible and visible disabilities in the job search. And I'd like to just warmly welcome the two experts that we have who are going to be leading the session: Joelle Fandera-Randall from the University Career Center, as well as my colleague Megan Marshall from the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX Office. Megan and Joelle, such a pleasure to have you with us today. All right, just a couple of items. Again, my name is Louise Jackson. To describe myself, I am the director of the Alumni Career and Education Programs with the Alumni Association. I am wearing a black blouse with small white dots, and I go with the pronouns, I use the pronouns she, her, hers. And again, just warmly welcome you to the session. We also like to thank one of our alumni, Michelle Kujat, for joining us. Michelle's going to be sharing some of her own personal experience in the job search. Michelle, we just thank you again when we get to that portion. Really appreciate you sharing your experience of what it was like going through a job search as an alum in this space. Some housekeeping quickly before we get started. We're providing both CART and ASL services for this event. If there are absolutely any accessibility issues or concerns, please don't hesitate to let my colleague Brooke know in the chat feature or in the Q&A feature. Brooke will do her very best to assist you. This is an interactive webinar that is being recorded. The first portion of the event is being recorded. The latter portion, when we get to the Q&A feature and more of the casual conversation, will not be recorded. We wanted to do so to ensure that you feel there's a very safe space for you to have some honest conversations as to any concerns you may have. We'll do our very best to get to your questions, so make sure you get those questions in so we can have a very interactive conversation. And without further ado, I'd like to share more about both Joelle and Megan and their phenomenal expertise. So Joelle is the Assistant Director of the University Career Center here at the University of Michigan. She loves helping individuals articulate their skills, values, and interests as it relates to their future careers. Joelle is passionate about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and helping students realize their potential. Joelle, super excited to have you. When we thought of the session, you were one of the people that came to mind. So really grateful to you sharing your expertise. And also my colleague, Megan Marshall. Megan is the Deputy ADA Coordinator for the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX Office. She works to provide guidance and support with regard to the university's responsibilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act and similar laws. Megan is a UM 2013 disabled alumna, and she is a graduate of the Wayne State University's master's program in rehabilitation counseling and community inclusion. She's also a licensed certified rehabilitation counselor. So Megan, such a pleasure to have you as well. And I'm going to hand it off to you and your phenomenal expertise. Thank you so much.
Well, we are so excited to get this session started. I just want to describe myself. I have dark brown hair and I'm wearing a blue blazer and a pink and navy blue top, and I use she and her pronouns. And Megan, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Megan Marshall. I am wearing a burnt orange and brown dress today, as well as have dark brown hair that's just currently down. And I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. And as Joelle said, we're very excited to talk with you all today and have a really great discussion as well. Okay, and diving honestly right on in is really just setting the foundation, ADA basics, which stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And first and foremost, what is a disability? Well, the legal definition as under the ADA defines disability in three separate entities. The first and foremost one is really a physical or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. The second definition is having a record of having such an impairment. A lot of times one can look at this as individuals who maybe had a diagnosis of cancer in the past, right? They have a record of cancer, but they are currently in remission, but they would still be protected under the ADA, given the fact that they have a record of a disability. The third bullet point is being perceived as having such an impairment. This really relies on people's perceptions, right? Of indicating that someone might have a disability. You are still protected under the ADA against any sort of discrimination or harassment that is related to disabilities. And really what the ADA is making sure to make clear is that no qualified individual with a disability shall, on the basis of their disability, be excluded from participation in services, benefits of an experience, a program or activity of employment. And really, again, beyond the discrimination and harassment protections, there is this duty to provide reasonable accommodations to those who are qualified for employment. And just a little caveat, something that is really important to know is that that duty to provide a reasonable accommodation only extends to the first two bullet points of the disability definition that we talked about, a physical or mental impairment or having a record of such an impairment. There is no duty to provide accommodations based on being perceived as having an impairment. Also, something to really be conscious of is that the ADA is what we call the floor, is really the foundation for protections. And what that means is that when you are applying to various jobs or employment, especially if you're looking at various locales throughout the United States, really pay attention as well. Do some research on the state and local laws, as they could provide more protection actually beyond what is listed in the ADA for individuals with disabilities. So that's something that you might want to really go ahead and pay attention to as well. ADA is just one law that protects you. Next slide, Joelle.
Of course. And so something when we were creating this and we received some questions was around disclosure or defining accommodations. And so we wanted to kind of set the tone here in the sense of accommodations. Our employers or coworkers are not required to provide accommodations to workers who have chosen not to disclose their disability. So if you're looking for accommodations, that's a caveat we wanted to make sure you all understood that piece. And then also maybe another reason folks may decide to disclose is for awareness. You may choose to disclose in order to have an open dialogue about the disability in the workplace and whom that will be. We're going to kind of process through that as a group. And so the next couple slides, we're going to connect about why, when, what, whom, and how to disclose. And so I'm going to go to the next slide. All right. And so when you are, it's a personal choice. I think that's a really important thing that when Megan and I were co-creating this, that we wanted to make a very important note for you all. So why should I disclose if you're processing that? And that's in regards if you're thinking about asking for an accommodation or a modification or adjustment to the work environment that will allow you to be a qualified applicant. So that might be in the interview process, or you've already accepted the position, congrats, and you are currently an employee with a disability. And so in that application process or performing the essential job functions. And so just wanted to kind of explain the why. Also, disclosure is a voluntary act, and you can see it's all caps and bolded, meaning that is your choice to reveal a disability in the purpose of receiving an accommodation or awareness. And so we wanted to make sure that was really clear for you all as we're kind of processing this space, because we know everyone's entering this space with different knowledge areas. So Megan's going to explain the when if you decide that you would like to.
Yeah, so the next thought process is maybe when should I disclose, right? If I've decided to do so. Again, really important, there is no quote unquote one right time to do this. It's very flexible when you decide to disclose if you want to. One can disclose during the application stage, right? This can be in your resume, in your cover letter. by maybe reaching out to the designated individual on the job posting that is designated for, hey, if you have accommodation needs, please reach out to me. You might disclose during the interview stage. You might disclose during the acceptance of a job offer, or you might disclose during the days or years that you are employed at that position. There again really is no cutoff date or time for when you have to disclose. If you want to disclose, again, as Joelle pointed out, it is very much a personal choice. And if you choose to disclose, something that we want to be really clear about is that accommodations are not what we call retroactive. So really our recommendation is that it's best to be proactive if you feel that your disability could potentially affect your work performance or your conduct during the job and performing those duties. Because the accommodation starts in supporting you when it's activated. Anything before then, would not be accommodated at that point. Accommodations don't go back in time. Now, an important question that I always get asked is, what rights do employers have during this whole process? What can they ask me? What can they not ask me? And how do I go about that? If you decide to disclose a disability, or if a disability is readily apparent, then an employer is allowed to ask you the following. First, the main question is the employer is allowed to ask you, do you need a reasonable accommodation to perform the essential functions of this job? If you answer yes, then they are allowed a follow-up question. And that follow-up question is, what accommodations would enable you to perform the essential functions of the job? And those are two questions that really want to be cognizant of. Again, if you answer no, you don't need accommodations, the conversation ends there. And the interview or whenever it happens, conversation should continue on. Joelle, next slide, please.
So what should I disclose? I think when coaching folks around disclosure is preparing a disclosure plan, a loose script. And I think for some folks, just having that, I always like to say in my back pocket, can really help you with that conversation. And so a disclosure script could include general information about your disability, but you also do not have to say what your disability is either. Why you've chosen to disclose, and how your disability may impact your performance. Also, I think a nice strategy for folks is to think about what types of accommodations have worked for you in the past. Pulling from previous experience can be really empowering for you. And then also what types of accommodations you anticipate needing in the workplace. So I work a lot with collegiate students. And so in their experience, sometimes they have classroom accommodations. There's a really great tool called Ask Jan that we will be sharing, and it is on the resource guide you received ahead of time during this presentation, that you can also explore the different types of accommodations just to help you brainstorm and feel more informed. And then the other piece is that it's not necessary to disclose every detail of your medical or personal information. So really want to empower you to kind of think about that. Like, you don't have to overshare, or you don't have to go into those fine details. And that sometimes has been really liberating for folks that I'm meeting with around disclosure. And then also keep your disclosure positive. You are able to do the essential functions of the job and focus on your wonderful abilities, because you are a stellar candidate. And so I just want to give you that little pep talk in this space as well. And so I'm going to go to the next one, which is Megan, of whom, if you decide to.
Some questions to ask yourself when you decide to disclose is, who should I consider having this conversation with? Some questions maybe to ask yourself is, does this individual have the power to provide me with accommodations? Is this person someone that I would trust, or someone who will support me? And some, starters, essentially starting points for you could be some recommendations wouldn't be prospective employers is someone you can always absolutely disclose to. You can disclose to workplace mentors, human resources personnel, or an eventual supervisor, an ADA coordinator. And a lot of times for those individuals who have asked me that question, I would maybe recommend starting with your human resources representative, or if your organization has an ADA coordinator, because a lot of organizations and companies do, sometimes they might actually even be embedded in human resources. I would maybe encourage you to start there. Why, you ask, is because they're usually a confidential private resource. So they will be able to really provide you with information. You can be very candid with them. And that information stays between you and that individual within HR or the ADA coordinator. Again, if you were to disclose to anyone else, that is usually a very much a private conversation. That information should not be disclosed or talked about to anyone else unless it's a need to know basis. But again, starting with your HR rep or ADA coordinator would probably be a really good first step if you're unsure where to go.
So how? I know we mentioned this, there's a number of ways. Some folks will choose to do in writing, and there's a sample in askjan.org.soar. You can definitely explore that. Also, Megan is going to put in a chat a loose script. If you disclose in person, practicing your disclosure script with someone close to you can really make the process easier. And I have found doing that with students can be really helpful. And so in the chat, you will see, for example, I have blank disability. I have the current required skills. You would kind of reflect on those to do the essential job functions. Sometimes function limitations may infer my ability to do A, B, or C. And if it is helpful with these specific accommodations you may need, and then I work best when it might be when with timing if you want a flexible schedule. So that's just a loose script and a nice starting point for you if you're not really sure where to get started. And so we hope that this helps you in your process, because that's why when putting this together and we received some questions about disclosure, we wanted to kind of frame this. And so the next piece is how we're going to kind of sequence the job search conversations today. And so I'm going to go to the next slide. And so when you think of the job search process, we've kind of coupled it in 3 different ways: the pre-interview phase, during interview, and post-interviewing phase. I also want to name my colleague Kirsten Elling. We co-created the next resource that's going to be added to the chat, where it's assessing how committed an organization is to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that worksheet is really helpful for you when you're leaning into exploring an organization, but we are using a similar sequence for today, but really leaning into the identity of having a disability. And I also want to name that there's intersections of identities too that we know, but we're framing it with these frames today. And so in the pre-interview phase, we hope that folks will reflect and research. So when reflecting, thinking about your social identities, diversity, equity, inclusion is DEI, if that's value for you. Researching the position, organization, industries, and application process. And then during the interview, congrats, you've moved forward. They've contacted you. So during the interview phase could be a phone, virtual connection, meeting with team members where you might be physically going to the office. And then after that experience is the post-interviewing, where we encourage you to take time to reflect on the offer potentially, or evaluate your experience, how you felt about the team, also key things about learning more about the organizational culture. And so this is the sequence that we're going to be leaning into in the next couple of slides. And so the pre-interview, this is the reflection. We hope that you reflect on how you're feeling around disclosure or asking for accommodations. Again, it's a personal choice. And then researching what type of accommodations could be helpful, or pulling from previous accommodations in the past. Also, I have found it's really empowering to review an organization's mission, values, goals. Does it connect with you? There's also some additional questions in that handout too to help you reflect. But this is the pre-interview phase and reflection. Megan's going to take it away for the next one.
Okay, when researching, right, in the pre-interview stage, where this slide is really going to focus on that job posting, right? You found a posting that you're really interested in, you think could be a great candidate for applying, and really honing in on really reviewing and understanding the job's essential functions is key. Now, essential functions, you're asking maybe yourself, what in the world is that? Those are all those bullet points that you're probably seeing on the job posting, saying exactly what the individual will be doing in this position, how they might be doing the position. Sometimes percentages are used on a job posting. 60% of this job position will be doing this, another 40 will be doing this. Those are the things that you really want to hone in on. Hone in on how are they worded, right? Notice maybe the frequency, the intensity, the environment, or like duration verbiage, which can be things like words where they use often, typically, rarely, outdoors, indoors. These again are going to help you really pinpoint whether maybe you do need to disclose in order to ask for accommodations, and whether you feel that this would be a position where you can feel successful in the role. Again, how are they worded? Focus as well, not only on the task itself that they are stating, but also any mentions of productivity, output, metrics, as those are actually things that can also be considered an essential function of the job. And I know, for instance, I've worked with individuals who, for instance, a metric, they're maybe in a call center and they have to, metric would mean that they need to answer 5 calls per hour and stuff like that. If you might think that your disability might impact that metric, that's maybe something to consider. Also, really kind of honing in on maybe looking at a positive is how they are worded. Do they focus on the end goal of a task or the way in which they were meant to be accomplished? So what I mean by this question is that this is still very much a learning curve for employers when they're writing job descriptions. But it's usually a good indication that they have great awareness, a better understanding of maybe individuals with disabilities and how to perform jobs by really honing in on not being so prescriptive of how to complete a task, right? Because at the end of the day, accommodations are meant to modify, things of the job, but not change the essential functions of the job. Those are essentially pillars that cannot essentially be moved in retrospect. So again, an example would be for this position, the individual needs to move XYZ from location A to location B. Instead of using the word lift, right? Maybe this individual, can move it by doing a different mechanism than lifting it, right? Maybe they can use other technology, other mobility aids to help them in moving object to location A to location B. So sometimes looking at the wording of these essential job functions can also be a clue into the organization's understanding of accommodations of individuals with disabilities, both visible and invisible. Second bullet point is really honing in on, again, can you perform each listed task with or without accommodations? And does the job posting list a commitment to diversity and inclusion? Maybe does the position mention the EEOC? Does it mention a way to request accommodations? Those are usually probably all positive signs that they know that individuals with disabilities might apply to the position and that they're open to having those individuals apply and probably work with the organization. Because at the end of the day, what the job posting, what this research is indicating to you is you want to have a feeling that when you accept a job offer, you are essentially saying, yes, I can perform the essential functions of this job with accommodations or without accommodations. Next slide, please, Joelle. Okay, and it's me still. Awesome. So this is a different phase. This is during the interview phase. And these are some things to consider during that phase. So one thing that we're going to be talking about this is prior to a conditional offer. So kind of keeping that in mind. During this stage, employers are allowed to ask very limited disability related questions. And pretty much even more accurately, their questions are very limited in the sense because of the history of implicit and explicit biases and of people being excluded in the past. And if a disability is disclosed or apparent, then an employer can ask only one question and then one follow-up question. We kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I'll repeat it just to make sure it really sinks in, because I know this is a question a lot of people are really interested in to know. The employer can ask the question, if it's disclosed or apparent of a disability, do you need a reasonable accommodation to provide the essential functions of this job? If you reply no, that's the end of that conversation. The employer should move on with other interview questions, other discussions. However, if you were to reply yes, that you would need a reasonable accommodation, they can follow up and ask you what accommodations would enable you to perform the essential functions of the job. This is where you can then disclose either very specifically or vaguely, maybe the difficulties or limitations that you foresee for this position and what accommodations might be helpful for that, et cetera. And then let's see. Oh yeah, just again, to make this really clear, employers should not ask any questions or avoid any questions that would potentially elicit information about a disability. So some examples are, did you ever take a bunch of leave on your last job? What medications do you use? Do you have any medical conditions? Just write out and come in and saying it. What kind of injury history do you have? Have you ever filed a workers' compensation claim? None of these type of questions should be asked by any employer because of the potential answer being medically related. And that's something that the employers know and should know to avoid. And that's again why maybe before disclosing, so again, always something to maybe talk through with your HR representative or ADA coordinator on maybe working through a script on how you would want to disclose such information. But that is what employers can and cannot ask or do during an interview process. Next slide, please, Joelle.
So congrats, you went through the interview process and now we're in the post-interview. And so we framed it, again, this is our final sequence phase of evaluation. So this is one of two slides. So when you're evaluating, we hope that you think about these core questions. Does this organization have a commitment to disability community? Are there any affinity groups or employer-related groups or other resources? Did you feel welcomed in the office, both virtual or in person? How do the staff treat one another and also how they treat you as the time you may have, if you're physically going to the office, entered the meeting or the office to the time that you left. Also same with the lovely virtual landscape as well. Does the organization also design space to accommodate for people's staff requests? So for example, is looking to see if there's prayer rooms or nursing rooms. Those are things just to kind of think about. And also, has the organization been involved with any civil lawsuits? That can be really helpful in your evaluation process, and also kind of leaning into you researching that as well, because I don't think some of the organizations may think of, oh, we have a prayer room, or oh, we've had a civil lawsuit. So some of these things in your evaluation, just to think about. Also, when you're evaluating post-interview, were you energized by the job? Like thinking through the actual work that you may be doing as well as the culture of an organization. Because I think when coaching students, a lot of folks, evaluation goes to the offer, when really I think culture and community has a large impact as well. So just some things for you all to think about as you're leaning into this evaluation sequence of how we're framing our conversation today. And I'm going to go to the post-interview piece, and then it's Megan's taking us to the home stretch, if you will, if we're thinking of a baseball.
Okay, so again, this is post-interview and really honing in on reflecting on that offer again. Because what happens during this stage of the job search process, interview process, is after a conditional offer of employment is made, there is much greater flexibility for employers on what they can ask potential employees or employees if you were to accept. Some of these questions can be questions that they would ask any employee in the same job position or category. So they might be allowed to ask medical related questions as long as there is first and foremost a legitimate business purpose, and or if there are job evaluations like medical examinations that you're asking everyone else to submit to as an employer. A lot of times you will see this pop up in maybe the trades positions and stuff like that. Driving, operating machinery and stuff like that. A lot of times medical examinations might be asked of all employees. And that is something that the employer is allowed to ask potential employees and accepted employees to follow through with. And again, it is during this conditional offer, essentially, when the job comes back and they say, hey, we loved your interview. We loved, everything that you have to offer. We think you would be a great fit here. We would love to offer you a position. This is again where you are more than welcome, if you feel comfortable, to disclose a disability and engage in what is called the interactive process following that disclosure. And a lot of times the interactive process is going through, first and foremost, that step of disclosure, saying, I have a disability and I need accommodations in order to perform the essential functions of this job. And going through that process is something that can be started here, and where actually I've seen a lot of people bring up disclosure at this point in time, waiting for that offer to come in. And this is again where a little tiny caveat, there's much more information I could totally speak to about this. I could go on and on about it, but this is where medical documentation may be requested of the employee. And this is where questions might be asked about a potential accommodations that could be helpful. And so if an employer were to ask for medical documentation after your disclosure, again, they should be asking that if you disclose a disability and it's not readily apparent maybe what accommodations you would need, or they need more information on what could be helpful. So that is something that they can ask for. But there's always, of course, with any of this stuff, it's always individualistic. It's always very tied to you, your needs, your comfortability level. So again, I think just a closing piece that I could say is, for all of this information, Joelle and I were trying to give very high level information that could be applicable for everyone, and everyone can use this information. But again, if you ever need support in really tailoring this to yourself, hopefully that may be something you feel comfortable asking in our Q&A discussion, a little bit more detailed information. But again, there's always caveats to everything to make this really fit you. So that's kind of the end of the reflection on offer, because then we move into resources. Joelle, do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Sure. And so some of these resources, you are welcome. This is geared for students. The first one is the Career Center Content Resources. It's our identity focused toolkits, and it's related for students with disabilities. Also, Ask Jan is honestly my favorite tool. And I also feel like when I've coached folks, they have really appreciated this tool, and it's updated constantly. And then, so Ask Jan is the second on our screen, as well as the handout assessing organizational culture. There's some really helpful reflective things, and there's a worksheet that's associated with it as well.